The sun hung low over the prairie, dragging long shadows across the brittle grass and cracked soil. Heat shimmered like ghosts above the land, casting everything in a wavering, unreal haze. Dust swirled with each breath of wind, whispering secrets through the bones of an abandoned wagon on the side of a dirt trail. Just beyond it, a woman crouched beside a wooden water trough, her hands shaking as she cupped the lukewarm water to her mouth like a starving animal. She was gaunt, filthy. Her dress had once been pale blue, now reduced to tatters clinging to her like damp rags. Mud clung to her hem, her bonnet had long been lost, and her hair, once pinned with care, now hung wild and matted across her face. She drank in frantic gulps, her sunburned lips cracking with each swallow. From the shadows of the livery barn, a man watched. He'd been hauling buckets of water when he first spotted her staggering down the rise. Thought she might have been a mirage. Folks didn't just appear like that in this corner of Wyoming territory, not unless they were running from something or toward something worse. But as she dropped to her knees at his trough and drank like a creature starved of more than just water, he set the bucket down and stepped forward. The old boards groaned beneath his boots, but she didn't notice. She didn't see him until he was standing over her, blocking out the sun. Then she flinched hard, scrambling back on her hands, wide eyes darting with fear. Her voice caught in her throat before she could speak. He held up a hand, calm, unthreatening. "You're not in trouble," he said softly. His voice was low, steady, with a faint southern drawl. "You're welcome to it. But if you'd rather use a cup than your hands—" He offered the battered tin mug he'd brought from the porch. Her lips parted, breath wheezing in her throat. She blinked, and tears welled unbidden. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she reached for the cup. Their hands didn't touch, but something passed between them all the same, an understanding, or maybe just the weight of human recognition. She drank slower this time. "Sit." He waited. After a long moment, he said, "You can come inside, ma'am. You look half dead, and I don't think a trough's the best place to gather your strength." She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the cabin, then back at him. Her voice finally cracked free, raspy and dry. "I don't want trouble. You won't find it with me." Her legs buckled as she tried to stand. He caught her before she hit the ground, surprised by how little she weighed. She tensed at his touch but didn't pull away. "My name's Elias Mercer," he said, helping her upright. "I run the livery and patch fences for what's left of the town." "You—" She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her lips trembled. "That's all right," he said. "You don't have to talk yet." He led her gently toward the cabin, a modest one-room structure with a shaded porch and a rocking chair worn smooth with time. Inside was cooler, the stone hearth dark from last night's fire, the air heavy with the scent of aged wood and faint tobacco. He guided her to the bed and fetched a canteen and a clean rag from a side shelf. She watched him, wary but too weak to flee. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Clara." He turned. "Clara." She nodded once. "Clara Dobbins." He poured water onto the rag and handed it to her. She pressed it to her face, breathing in the moisture like it was medicine. "Where you headed, Miss Dobbins?" Clara stared at the floorboards. "I'm not sure anymore." Elias didn't press. The lines in her face said enough, worry etched deeper than any age could explain. She looked young still, maybe late 20s, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who'd walked too long in the dark. He fixed her a plate, dried beans, half a biscuit and salted pork, quietly laying it beside her without commentary. She ate in silence, slowly, as though chewing took all the strength she had left. It wasn't until the plate was clean that she looked up again. "My husband's dead. Killed in Kansas by raiders dressed like soldiers. Took everything, our wagon, the horses, the coin we'd saved for 2 years. Elias's jaw tensed. "I'm sorry. I buried him by the creek." Her voice faltered. "Didn't even mark the spot. I thought maybe I'd make it to Laramie. Find work in a kitchen or sewing shop. But I lost my way 2 days ago. Been walking in circles. Nothing but dirt and sky. She was crying again, but quiet, like she'd run out of tears long ago and only the habit remained. I ain't the type to turn away a soul in need, Elias said. You can stay here till you find your feet. I don't want charity. Then think of it as neighbors helping neighbors. There ain't been neighbors on this trail in months. Maybe it's time there were. The wind howled outside, a low mournful cry that rattled the shutters and blew dust across the porch. Elias moved to close the door, then paused. You're not the first soul to come through broken, he said, looking out into the emptiness. And I doubt you'll be the last. He didn't mention his own past. The war. The years spent fighting for a cause that crumbled in his hand. The grave markers he'd carved himself. Those stories had sharp edges, and he didn't think she needed more pain tonight. Clara slept hard that night, curled beneath a wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. Elias sat by the hearth, cleaning his rifle by lamplight, his thoughts distant and grim. He knew she wasn't safe out here. Not really. The town 2 miles down the trail was barely clinging to life, and the road between was no place for a lone woman with no means of defense. She'd need more than water and food. She'd need protection. Purpose. In the quiet, he remembered the last time he'd offered someone help, a boy no older than 16 trying to cross through hostile territory with his sister. That had ended in gunfire and grief. He'd buried the boy himself. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and stared into the flickering lamplight. By dawn, Clara was already awake, standing at the edge of the porch wrapped in a borrowed coat. She stared toward the horizon like it owed her something, an answer, a promise, maybe just a little mercy. Elias handed her a tin of coffee. She took it, fingers brushing his, and offered the smallest of nods. I should go, she said. Where? She didn't answer. He let the silence linger. Finally, he said, there's work at the Miller Ranch. They lost a hand 2 weeks ago. I could take you, speak on your behalf. You don't even know me. I know enough. She sipped the coffee, savoring the warmth. For the first time since she'd arrived, she allowed herself to sit beside him. The silence between them changed, not empty, but full of something beginning to take shape. Maybe trust, maybe just survival, but it was something. And as the prairie wind picked up again, neither of them moved to break it. The wagon wheels cracked over the dried earth as Elias drove Clara toward the Miller Ranch, the dust trailing behind them like smoke from a dying fire. The sun was already clawing its way toward noon, painting the hills with gold and sweat. Clara sat beside him, arms wrapped around herself despite the heat. She hadn't spoken much since they left, only nodded when Elias asked if she was ready. He didn't push. Sometimes silence said more than words ever could. Elias watched the road, but he wasn't blind to the change in her. When she'd arrived, she'd been more ghost than woman, hollow-eyed, brittle. But now, even if faint, there was color returning to her cheeks. Her shoulders were still tense, like she was bracing for some blow that hadn't yet landed, but at least she was upright. Present. That was something. The Miller Ranch came into view just past the ridge, a patch of green in a field of dying yellow. Cattle dotted the far pastures, slow-moving shadows against the horizon. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop near the corral, where a man in a sweat-darkened shirt was tying down a broken fence post. He straightened as they approached, wiping his hands on his trousers. Elias, the man called, nodding. Didn't expect you out this way. Elias stepped down, then turned to offer Clara a hand. She hesitated only a second before accepting. Tom, Elias said, this is Clara Dobbins. She's new to these parts. Heard you were short a cook or hand. Tom looked her over, not unkindly, but with a rancher's practical eye. You know your way around a stove, ma'am? Clara nodded. Yes, sir. I can bake, butcher, and boil beans without burning 'em. Tom chuckled. Well, that's better than the last girl we had. Burned water, I swear. He gave Elias a quick glance. Elias offered a slight nod. Tom understood. There were questions better left unasked. I'll give her a try, Tom said. Pays 2 bits a day and meals. Rooms in the back of the cookhouse. Clara blinked, surprised at how fast the offer came. I'm grateful, she said, voice steady. I'll leave you to it, Elias said, tipping his hat. Clara turned to him, a flicker of unease crossing her features. You're going. He met her eyes. You'll be all right. But I'll come by in a day or two, make sure all's as promised. Something unspoken passed between them again, less fragile than before. As he turned the wagon around, Elias didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel her standing there, watching him ride away. The work was hard, but Clara preferred it that way. Hard work kept the ghosts at bay. She rose before the sun, her hands blistered from chopping vegetables and scrubbing floors, her back aching by dusk. But the ache was honest. It reminded her she was still alive. Tom Miller's wife, Beth, kept a watchful eye, but not an unkind one. The other hands respected Clara's silence. There were no questions, no probing. Only nods, greetings, and requests for second helpings. Still, the nights were the worst. She lay in the small cot behind the cookhouse, staring at the low ceiling, listening to the coyotes howl across the plain. Each night she thought of her husband, of the way his body had fallen beside the river, eyes wide, hands still reaching for her as those raiders rode off with everything they owned. And sometimes she thought of Elias. His quiet way. The steadiness in his voice. How he hadn't asked for her story before offering help. That kind of man was rare out here. Rarer than rain. 2 days later, just past dawn, Clara heard a familiar sound. Hoofbeat. Slow and deliberate. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. Elias sat atop his roan gelding, reins loose in one hand. He tipped his hat. Morning. You came, she said. I said I would. She allowed herself a small smile, the first real one in weeks. Come in. I've coffee on. They sat on the back stoop, tin cups in hand, the silence between them comfortable now. She looked healthier. He saw it in her posture, in the way her eyes held his without flinching. I'm grateful, she said at last. For everything. I didn't do much. You did more than most would. He didn't argue. Just sipped his coffee and stared out over the land. I've been thinking, Clara said quietly, about what comes next. Have you figured it out? Not all of it. But I know I want to stop running. Elias nodded slowly. That's a good start. Then, as if something heavy was shifting inside her, she said, when they came, those raiders, they wore Union blue. But they weren't soldiers. Not really. They laughed as they took our horses. Shot Henry without a word. One of them said I was lucky they didn't want company that night. Elias didn't look away. His jaw clenched, but his eyes stayed on hers. I wanted to die for weeks after, she said, her voice breaking. But now I'm just angry. And I don't know where to put it. Elias placed his cup down slowly. You put it in the work. In surviving. In building something that can't be taken from you. Even out here? Especially out here. A wind passed through, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed, and a hawk circled high above the bluff. Clara reached into her apron and pulled out a piece of folded paper, an old letter. She handed it to Elias. It's from my brother. Last I heard, he was in Deadwood, mining silver. He said if I ever needed help, I should find him. Elias read the letter quietly, then looked up. You thinking of going? I don't know. I don't want to be someone's burden. But I can't stay in limbo forever. Elias handed the letter back. Whatever you decide, you don't have to do it alone. They sat together in silence until the sun rose higher and the chores called. The next day, a new rider came to the ranch. Dusty coat, twitchy eyes. Said his name was Reed and he was looking for work. Tom Miller, ever desperate for hands, let him bunk in the shed and take on small tasks. But Clara noticed something off. The way Reed watched her. The way his hand never strayed far from the pistol on his hip. That night, after dinner, she asked Tom to send him away. Tom frowned. Got no proof he's done anything. He's not here to work, she said firmly. Tom hesitated, then shrugged. I'll keep an eye. But Clara didn't sleep. By dawn, Reed was gone, and so was one of the ranch's maras. When Elias returned the next evening, Clara told him everything. He was watching me. Like he knew me from somewhere. Could be one of them. I can't stay here. Elias nodded grimly. Then we move fast. You'll ride with me tomorrow. If your brother's in Deadwood, we'll find him. But we don't ride blind. I'll ask a few questions in town first. See who else is watching the roads. Clara looked down at her hands, then up at him. Why are you helping me still? He met her gaze with calm certainty. Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. And because I don't like seeing good people hunted. Her throat tightened. She nodded once, then stepped back inside to pack. As night fell, the wind picked up again, sharper now, colder. Elias remained on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. They were no longer simply surviving. Now they were preparing. By dawn, Clara rode behind Elias, wrapped in his spare duster, the saddle creaking beneath her with each steady step of the gelding. Her bag was light, containing only what she could carry, a dress, a letter, and a silver brooch that had belonged to her mother. The road was narrow, flanked by cottonwoods and thick brush, and the world was still, holding its breath as if it, too, understood they were fleeing something that had teeth. Elias didn't speak much as they traveled, but Clara found comfort in the silence. It was different from the silence of fear or grief. This one held purpose. They stopped briefly at a creek to water the horse and eat cold biscuits Clara had packed. She watched him kneel at the bank, refilling the canteen, his movements methodical, calm. There was a steadiness in Elias that made the chaos of her life feel suddenly distant. Like it had happened to someone else. You really think he'll be in Deadwood? She asked. Miners tend to stay where the silver runs strong. Your brother wrote that letter months ago, but it's the best place to start. She nodded, unsure what awaited her but comforted by the fact she wouldn't face it alone. As the sun crested higher, a shrill whistle echoed through the canyon ahead. Elias stiffened in the saddle. That ain't a bird, he muttered. He reined the gelding to a stop and dismounted, motioning for Clara to stay quiet. With practiced fingers, he checked the rifle slung across his back and stepped toward a rocky outcrop, scanning the ridgeline. Clara remained still, heart thudding. She recognized the sound. The raiders had whistled just like that before ambushing her husband. She clutched the saddle horn and scanned the trees. A figure emerged behind them, mounted and masked. Another soon flanked from the left, and then one more. 3 men in all, their rifles drawn, their faces shaded by bandanas and wide hats. Elias didn't react with panic. He stepped back beside Clara and spoke low and firm. Slide down and get behind the horse. She obeyed without hesitation, gripping the reins from the opposite side. Nice to see you again, Marshal, the one in front drawled. Clara blinked. Marshal? Elias straightened. Didn't expect scum like you to survive Bannock Ridge. The lead rider chuckled. Didn't expect you to play nursemaid to a widow either. What do you want? Elias asked. She's worth money to someone. And you, well, you've been a thorn in certain folks' sides for years now. Might be worth handing you both over for the right bounty. Clara's blood turned to ice. She stepped out from behind the gelding, voice sharp. You know who killed my husband? The man grinned beneath his bandana. Knew him. Killed him. He screamed your name before he bled out. Elias moved faster than Clara had ever seen. His rifle cracked, and the man on the left pitched backward, falling hard. In the same breath, Elias dropped and rolled, avoiding a shot from the rider on the right. Clara scrambled for the fallen man's gun, grasping it with shaking hands. The leader aimed at Elias, sneering. You think she'll shoot? Elias didn't reply, but his eyes shifted to Clara. She didn't think, didn't breathe. The shot rang out and the man slumped, falling from his horse. Silence returned, sudden and absolute. Elias rose slowly, brushing dirt from his coat. The third man groaned in the brush, still alive but unmoving. Clara lowered the revolver, hands trembling. Elias stepped to her, gently taking it from her fingers. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, though tears streaked her cheeks. "That was one of them. I'm sure of it. You did what you had to." She looked at him then, truly looked. "You're a marshal?" "Was. Still am in some towns." "Why didn't you say?" "Didn't think it mattered. And I figured you'd trust me more without the badge." She exhaled shakily. "I trust you more now." They dragged the wounded man to a tree and tied him securely before riding on. Elias left a note pinned to the man's coat for the next patrol, detailing names and crimes. Clara's hand still shook, but her spine was straighter, her eyes clear. Some part of her had changed in that moment. Something raw had burned away. They reached Deadwood by nightfall. A bustling place, loud and reeking of sweat, gunpowder, and ambition. The streets glowed with lanterns and saloons poured piano music into the dusk. Clara rode close to Elias, watching every face, listening for anything familiar. They stabled the horse and walked toward the boarding houses near the south end of town. Elias made inquiries, showed the letter to a wiry man behind the desk at the Miners' Rest. "Name's Samuel Dobbins?" the man said, adjusting his spectacles. "We had a Sam here 'bout 6 weeks ago. Moved into the hills with a few others, chasing a deep vein." "Any way to find him?" Clara asked. The man shrugged. "Maybe. He'd check supplies at Millie's store every other week." They thanked him and made their way to Millie's, where a stout woman with flour on her hands brightened at the name. "Sam?" "Yes, ma'am. Quiet fellow. Comes by regular. Due in 2 days or so." Clara let out a long breath. "Then we wait." They took a small room above the stables, modest but with clean sheets. Elias insisted Clara take the bed while he stayed in the chair by the door, rifle nearby. She didn't argue. She'd seen what lay beyond the safety of doors. The next morning, Clara stood outside the room, watching the sunrise, hair loose around her shoulders. Elias joined her, offering her a mug of coffee. "I keep seeing his face," she said softly. "The one I shot. That's normal. Will it ever stop?" "No," he said gently, "but it'll quiet. You'll learn to carry it without letting it carry you." She took a sip of the coffee. "Is that what you've done?" He didn't answer right away. "I've seen too much. Some days I think it's buried. Other days I wake up with the dead." They stood in silence a while. When they went back into town that afternoon, Clara wore her mother's brooch. She walked with her chin up, shoulders strong. They bought supplies, asked more questions, and waited. By the second evening, as the sun began to lower behind the hills, a familiar voice called her name from the main street. She turned to see a man with sunburned cheeks, dusty boots, and eyes wide with disbelief. "Clara! Sam!" They ran to each other, and she collapsed into her brother's arms, sobbing. He held her tight, disbelieving. "I thought you were dead," he whispered. "So did I." Elias stood back, watching, a faint smile on his lips. That night, over stew and whiskey, Sam listened as Clara told him everything. Not in every brutal detail, but enough. Elias explained the danger that still might follow. Sam, older and wearier than Clara remembered, nodded grimly. "You both come with me," he said. "I got a claim up north. No one'll find us there unless we want them to." Elias glanced at Clara. "That your choice?" She looked between them. The road ahead was uncertain. But this was the first time she felt the ground might actually hold beneath her feet. "I want to live," she said. "Not just survive. I want something more than running." Elias leaned forward. "Then we build it. Together." And as the lanterns flickered against the log walls, Clara felt the first flicker of peace she'd known in a long time. The past hadn't let go, but it no longer owned her. The cabin sat on the edge of a high ridge, overlooking a sea of pine that rolled endlessly into the horizon. Sam's claim, nestled between old mining trails and forgotten creeks, was modest. Just one room, a lean-to shed for supplies, and a half-dug shaft covered with tarp and pine boughs. But for Clara, it was sanctuary. Here, she no longer flinched at every crack of wood or passing shadow. The quiet held no threat, only wind, birdsong, and the rhythm of a life slowly being pieced together again. She spent her mornings gathering water, cleaning what little furniture there was, and tending to the garden patch Sam had started before winter. Her fingers grew rough with labor, her arms stronger, her back straighter. The ache she once carried in her chest no longer throbbed with every breath. It dulled, tucked away, replaced by the simple act of living. Elias stayed, though he'd made it clear he didn't intend to intrude. He built a second shelter down the hill, near a grove where deer sometimes grazed. He split wood, mended tools, and hunted. Most evenings he joined them for supper, sitting at the crude table Sam had crafted from old planks, sharing quiet stories from a past he rarely mentioned in full. The three of them moved like clockwork, each gear necessary, no motion wasted. But something shifted as weeks passed. It wasn't just survival anymore. Clara felt it each time Elias lingered a moment too long in the doorway, or when their fingers brushed while passing a tin cup. It was in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, as if memorizing every line of her face, not with desire, but with reverence. She wasn't ready. Not yet. But she noticed. Sam did too. One afternoon, he pulled Elias aside near the edge of the creek. Clara was hanging linens when she spotted them speaking in low tones, their stances calm but serious. "She's been through hell," Sam said, squinting against the sun. "You get that?" "I do," Elias replied. "I don't intend to rush her. Or confuse her. I just care." Sam nodded. "She needs peace more than anything. You disrupt that, I won't hesitate." Elias didn't take offense. Neither would I. Back at the cabin, Clara hung the last sheet and pretended not to have heard. But inside, her thoughts whirled. Elias had once been a stranger. Now his presence filled the corners of her life in quiet, dependable ways she hadn't expected to matter, but did. Days turned colder, nights brisk with the breath of coming winter. Sam reinforced the cabin walls, while Elias trapped and smoked meat. Clara sewed extra blankets from old feed sacks and wool. The three of them worked with the unspoken urgency that frontier life demanded. No wasted time, no wasted energy. One evening, a distant gunshot cracked through the trees. Not the sound of hunting, sharper, purposeful. Elias was up before the echo faded, rifle in hand. Clara stood at the door, heart suddenly hammering. Sam grabbed his own weapon and nodded to Elias. "East Ridge," Elias said. "That wasn't far." Clara stepped in front of them. "Let me come." "No," Sam said flatly. "I can shoot." "You shouldn't have to." But Elias met her gaze and saw the resolve there. "You stay behind me. If it's trouble, you drop and crawl back. Understand?" She nodded. The three moved through the underbrush in near silence, every sense alert. The forest pressed in, thick and watchful. As they neared the ridge, they heard voices, two men arguing, then a muffled cry. They dropped low. Elias signaled, and Sam flanked left. Through the trees, they saw a man tied to a tree, bleeding from the temple. Two others circled him, rifles slung, laughing cruelly. One kicked the man hard enough to make him slump. The other unholstered his revolver. "Where's the gold, you lying bastard?" one shouted. Elias moved fast. Clara stayed low, gripping her pistol with both hands. Sam flanked the nearest man, rising from the brush like a ghost. The ambush was swift and brutal. One attacker fired wide, missing Elias by a foot before Sam tackled him. The second tried to run, but Clara stepped into his path, pistol raised. "Drop it," she shouted. The man hesitated, calculating her. "You won't shoot." Clara stepped forward, steady now. "Try me." He dropped the gun. They tied the men and helped the bleeding victim down. He was dazed, weak, but alive. Name was Reuben, a prospector. Said he'd struck Silver and his 2 friends had turned on him. Clara pressed cloth to his wound while Elias scanned the trees. We'll bring him back, Elias said. Patch him up. Then he can decide where to go. As they led the injured man through the woods, Clara realized how different she'd become. A month ago, she would have frozen. Now, her hand hadn't even shaken. Elias had noticed too. He gave her a brief nod as they walked, a silent recognition of the change. Back at the cabin, they tended to Reuben. Sam stood guard while Elias stitched the wound. Clara made broth and spoke gently to the shaken man. He didn't say much, but when he looked at her, there was gratitude. You're strong, he whispered. She didn't know what to say. No one had ever said that to her before. That night, after Reuben slept and Sam took first watch, Elias joined Clara outside by the fire. The stars burned sharp above them, and their breaths puffed in misty clouds. You did well, he said. Clara stirred the coals. Felt like I was watching someone else. Someone braver than I am. You were just being who you already are. You just forgot for a while. She looked at him, eyes glinting in firelight. You always say things like that. Things that make sense later. Elias chuckled softly. Maybe I've lived too long in places where words meant more than bullets. A silence settled, not awkward, but thoughtful. Then Clara spoke. Do you ever think about staying? Not just nearby. I mean really staying. Elias didn't answer immediately. He reached down, picked up a stick, and poked at the fire. I've been a lot of things, he said. Soldier. Lawman. Drifter. I never planned to be any of them. Just went where I was needed. Maybe now you're needed here. He looked at her then, eyes searching. Would you want that? I think I would, she said softly. For a long moment, the fire crackled, and the stars watched from above. Then Elias nodded, slowly. All right, he said. I'll stay. The promise was simple. No grand declarations, no vows. Just a quiet agreement between 2 people who had survived more than most and somehow found each other. Inside the cabin, Sam watched them from the window, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Whatever came next, they would face it as a unit. Not just a widow, her brother, and a marshal, but something stronger. Something whole. And for the first time since the world had turned to ash, Clara allowed herself to believe. The worst might be behind them. The future, uncertain as it was, no longer terrified her. It called.